Alrighty then. How is everyone doing tonight? Nicole, how are things? I noticed you're in the chat room. Hope things are going well for you. New year, who dis? Yep. It's all good. And thank you for being there. Alright, seems I've gotten over my cold and can get back into the swing of things, so that's cool. And I guess the only question I had is, can you hear the crackling fire in the background? I'm presuming you can. Alright, cool. Cool. Alright, so start recording so I can capture the audio. And before we get started, just want to, for those people watching the VOD or seeing it on YouTube whenever I get around to actually making these available on YouTube, which I gotta get to editing, which is the biggest pain right now. But yeah, sorry, I've been away for a while between the holidays, and frankly, I was sick and didn't want to kind of mess my voice up further, so needed to get some vocal rest. But hopefully everything will be good tonight, and let's just kind of jump into it. So I will put this to the other scene. Sit back, relax, and enjoy Chapter 4 of Tom Swift and His Airship. Previously on Tom Swift and His Airship, Tom and Eradicate basically ran into Anson Morse, one of the scoundrels from the previous couple of books, and Anson basically took a face full of whitewash. And that's where we pick up. Chapter 4, A Trial Trip. There was no fear that Anson Morse would return to the attack. Blinded by the whitewash which ran in his eyes, but which, being slaked, did not burn him, he groped blindly about, pawing the air with his outstretched hands. Now, it says grouped, but I bet they meant groped. That's my guess, because that sounds weird otherwise. You wait, you'll suffer for this, he spluttered, as soon as he could free his mouth from the trickling fluid. Then, wiping it from his face with his hands as best he could, he shook a fist at Tom. I'll pay you and that black rascal back, he cried. You wait. I hope you pay me soon, answered Eradicate. Case, how's that whitewash was 25 cents, and I gotta get more to finish doing a chicken coop I'm working on. Whoa, Boomerang. There's not gonna be any more trouble, I reckon. Morse did not reply. He had been most unexpectedly repulsed, and with the whitewash dripping from his garments, he turned and fairly ran toward a strip of woodland that bordered the highway at that place. Tom approached the man and held out a welcoming hand. I don't know what I'd done if you hadn't come along, Rad, the lad said. That fellow was desperate, and this was a lonely spot to be attacked. Your whitewash came in mighty handy. Yes, sir, Mr. Swift. That's what it did. I know I could use it on him when he got too ornery, and that's what he done. But I was going to fight him with my brush if he made any more trouble. Oh, I fancy we've seen the last of him for some time, said Tom. But he looked worried. It was evident that the Happy Harry gang was still hanging around the neighborhood of Shopton, and the fact that Morse was bold enough to attack our hero in broad daylight argued that he felt little fear of the authorities. If you want to catch him, went on Eradicate, you can trace him by the whitewash that drops off of him, and he pointed to a trail of white drops which showed the path Morse had taken. No, the less I have to do with him, the better I like it, answered the lad. But I can't thank you enough, Rad. You've helped me out of difficult times several times now. You put me on the trail of the men in the deserted mansion, you warned me of the log Andy Foger placed across the road, and now you've saved me from Morse. Ah, that's nothing, Mr. Swift. You've sure done a lot for me. Besides, my mule, Boomerang, is entitled to the most credit this time. I was coming down the street on my way to a whitewashing job when I saw you and your lickety-split machine, for so Eradicate designated the motorcycle. I knew it was you, and I don't like looking at that man. Then I saw he held you, and I thought he was a burglar, so I yelled to Boomerang to hurry up. Now, mostly when I want Boomerang to hurry, he goes slow, and when I want him to go slow, he runs away. But this time he knew he was coming to help you, and he certainly did leg it. That's what he done. He run like he was going home to a stable full of oats, and that's how I got here so quick. Then I thought of the whitewash, and, well, I just used it. It was the most effective weapon you could have used, said Tom gratefully. Well, Mr. Swift, I had no weapon, spoke Eradicate earnestly. I didn't even have my razor in case I left it home, and I didn't have no weapon at all. I just used the whitewash, like you saw. Well, that's what I meant, answered Tom, trying not to laugh. I'm ever so much obliged to you, just the same, and here's $50 to pay for the whitewash. Oh, no, Mr. Swift, I don't want to take it. I can make some more whitewash. But Tom insisted and picked up his machine to sprint for home. Eradicate started to tell over again how he urged Boomerang on, but the lad had no time to listen. But I didn't have any weapon, Mr. Swift. Not even my razor, repeated Eradicate. Only the pail of whitewash. That is, unless you want to call my brush a weapon. Well, it's sort of one, admitted Tom with a laugh as he started his machine. Come around next week, Rad. We'll have some dirt eradicating for you to attend to. Indeed I will, Mr. Swift. Eradicate is my name, and I eradicates the dirt. But the man did look pretty odd with that pail of whitewash all over him. He sure did look most extraordinarily. Giddy up, Boomerang. See if you can break some more speed records now. But the mule appeared to be satisfied with what he'd done, and as he rode off, Tom looked back to see the man laboring to get the sleepy animal started. The lad didn't tell his father of the adventure with Morris, but he related the occurrence to Mr. Sharp. I'd like to get hold of that scoundrel and the others in the gang, exclaimed the balloonist. I'd take him up in the airship and drop him down the lake. He's a bad man. So are the others. Wonder what they want round here. Well, that's what's puzzling me, admitted Tom. I hope Dad doesn't hear about them, or he'll be sure to be worried, and maybe it'll interfere with his new ideas. He hasn't told you yet what he's engaged in inventing, has he? No, and I don't like to ask him. He said the other day, though, that it would rival our airship, but in a different way. I wonder what he meant. It's hard to say, but I don't believe he can invent anything that will go ahead of our craft, even if he is my own father, and the best one in the world, said Tom half-jokingly. Well, I got the bolts. Now, let's get to work. I'm anxious for a trial trip. No more than I am. I want to see if my ideas will work out in practice as well as they do in theory. For a week or more, Tom and Mr. Sharp labored on the airship, with Mr. Jackson to help them. The motor, with its 20 cylinders, was installed, and the big aluminum holder fastened to the frame of the planes. The rudders, one to control the elevation and depression of the craft, and the other to direct its flight to the right or left, were attached, and the steering wheel, as well as the levers regulating the motor, were put into place. About all that remains to be done now, said the aeronaut one night, as he and Tom stood in the big shed looking at their creation, is to fit up the car and paint the machine. Can't we make a trial trip before we fit up the car ready for a long flight? Asked the young inventor. Yes, but I wouldn't like to go out without painting the ship. Some parts of it might rust if we get into the moist, cloudy upper regions. Well, let's paint it tomorrow, and as soon as it's dry, we'll have a test. All right, I'll mix the paint the first thing in the morning. It took 2 days to paint the machine, for much care had to be used, and when it was finished, Tom looked admiringly up at it. We ought to name it, suggested Mr. Sharp as he removed a bit of paint from the end of the nose. To be sure, agreed Tom. And hold on, I have the very name for it. Red Cloud. Red Cloud? Questioned Mr. Sharp. Yes, exclaimed Tom with enthusiasm. It's painted red, at least the big aluminum gas container is, and we hope to go above the clouds in it. Why not Red Cloud? That's what it shall be, conceded the balloonist. If I had a bottle of malted milk or something like that, I'd christen it. We ought to have a young lady do that part, suggested Tom. They always have young ladies to name ships. Were you thinking of any particular young lady? Asked Mr. Sharp softly, and Tom blushed as he replied. Oh, no, of course that is well. Oh, hang on. Christen it yourself and leave me alone, he finished. Well, in the absence of Miss Mary Nestor, who I think would be the best one for the ceremony, said Mr. Sharp with a twinkle in his eyes, I christen thee Red Cloud. And with that he sprinkled some water on the pointed nose of the red aluminum gas bag, for the aeronaut and Tom were on a high staging, on a level with the upper part of the airship. Red Cloud it is, cried Tom enthusiastically. Now, tomorrow we'll see what it can do. The day of the test proved all that could be desired in the way of weather. The fact that an airship was being constructed in the Swift shops had been kept as secret as possible, but of course many in Shopton knew of it, for Andy Foger had spread the tidings. I hope we won't have a crowd around to see us go up, said Tom, as he and Mr. Sharp went to the shed to get the Red Cloud in readiness for the trial. I shouldn't want to have them laughing at us if we fail to rise. Don't worry, we'll go up all right, declared Mr. Sharp. The only thing I'm at all worried about is our speed. I want to go fast, but we may not be able to until our motor gets tuned up. But we'll rise. The gas machine had already been started, and the vapor was hissing inside the big aluminum holder. It was decided to try to go up under the lifting power of the gas and not use the aeroplane feature for sending aloft the ship, as there was hardly room around the shops for a good start. When enough of the vapor had been generated to make the airship buoyant, the big doors of the shed were opened, and Tom and Mr. Sharp, with the aid of Garrett and Mr. Swift, shoved it out slowly. There it is! There she comes! Cried several voices outside the high fence that surrounded the Swift property. They're going up! Andy Foger's in that bunch, remarked Tom with a grim smile. I hope we don't fail. We won't, don't worry, advised Mr. Sharp. The shouts outside the fence increased. It was evident that quite a crowd of boys as well as men had collected, though it was early in the morning. Somehow, news of the test had leaked out. The ship continued to get lighter and lighter as more gas was generated. It was held down by ropes fastened to stakes driven in the ground. Mr. Sharp entered the big car that was suspended below the airplanes. Come on, Tom, the aeronaut called. We're almost ready to fly. Will you come too, Mr. Swift and Garrett? Some other time, promised the aged inventor. It looks as though you were going to succeed, though. I'll wait until after the test before I venture. How about you, Garrett? Asked Tom of the engineer as the young inventor climbed into the car. The ground is good enough for me, was the answer with a smile. Broken bones don't mend so easily when you're past 65. But we're not going to fall, declared Mr. Sharp. All ready, Tom? Cast off. Here we go. The restraining ropes were quickly cast aside. Slowly at first, and then with a rush, as though feeling more and more sure of herself, the Red Cloud arose in the air like a gigantic bird of scarlet plumage. Up and up it went, higher than the house, higher than the big shed where it had been built, higher, higher, higher. There she is! Cried shrill voices of the boys. Well, that's kind of a tongue twister. Blah. There she is! Cried shrill voices of the boys in the meadow, and the hoarser tones of the men mingled with them. Hurrah! Cried Tom softly to the balloonist. We're off! And he waved his hand to his father and Garrett. I told you, spoke Mr. Sharp confidently. I'm going to start the propellers in a minute. Oh, dear me, goodness sakes alive, cried Mrs. Baggert, the housekeeper, running from the house and wringing her hands. I'm sure they'll fall. She looked up apprehensively, but Tom only waved his hand to her and threw her a kiss. Clearly, he had no fears, though it was his first time he had ever been in an airship. Mr. Sharp was as calm and collected as an ocean captain making his 100th trip across the Atlantic. "Throw on the main switch," he called to our hero, and Tom, moving to amidships in the car, did as directed. Mr. Sharp pulled several levers, adjusting some valves, and then with a rattle and bang, the huge 20-cylinder motor started. Waiting a moment to see that it was running smoothly, Mr. Sharp grasped the steering wheel. Then, with a quick motion, he threw the two propellers in gear. They began to whirl around rapidly. "Here we go!" cried Tom, and sure enough, the red cloud, now 500 feet in the air, shot forward, like a boat on the water, only with such a smooth, gliding, easy motion that it seemed like being borne along on a cloud. "She works! She works!" cried the balloonist. "Now to try our elevation rudder." And as the red cloud gathered speed, he tilted the small planes which sent the craft up or down according to the manner in which they were tilted. The next instant the airship was pointed at an angle toward the clouds and shooting along at swift speed, while from below came the admiring cheers of the crowd of boys and men. End of chapter 4. So, what we're going to do now, and this is more for the video folks, is what we did last time. And again, if this becomes too much of a pain, please tell me. But it's a nice way for me to be able to break things up a little bit and be able to, I don't know, maybe generate a little bit of income to help support the channel. So between chapters in the live stream, we're going to be running a 60-second ad break. So hang tight. We'll be right back. Gives me a chance to actually take a drink. All right. And welcome back. I hope that wasn't particularly painful for y'all. Before we start the next chapter, I'm just going to see who's in the chat room. Skippy, hey, good to see you again, man. Commander Root and Nicole, as always, thank you once again for joining us. Nicole, I would be really anxious to hear your thoughts about the ad end of things, but for now, let's continue. And we will switch back. Previously on Tom Swift and His Airship. In Chapter 4, Tom and Mr. Sharp got the airship test launched, and they were currently high up in the air. Chapter 5, Colliding with a Tower. All right, I haven't even started reading this, and already that sounds ominous. Let's see what happens. "She seems to work," observed Tom, looking from where he was stationed near some electrical switches toward Mr. Sharp. "Of course she does," replied the aeronaut. "I knew it would, but I wasn't so sure that it wouldn't scoot along in this fashion. We're making pretty good speed, but we'll do better when the motor gets to running smoother." "How high up are we?" asked Tom. The balloonist glanced at several gauges near the steering wheel. "A little short of 3,000 feet," he answered. "Do you want to go higher?" No, I guess not, was Tom's answer. He halted over the works, and his breath came in gasps. Don't get alarmed, called Mr. Sharp quickly, noting that his companion was in distress because of the high altitude. That always happens to persons who go into the thin air for the first time, just as if you had climbed a high mountain. Breathe as slowly as you can and swallow frequently. That will relieve the pressure on your eardrums. I'll send the ship lower. Tom did as he was advised, and the aeronaut, deflecting the rudder, sent the Red Cloud on a downward slant. Tom at once felt relieved, both because the actions of swallowing equalized the pressure on the eardrums and because the airship was soon in a more dense atmosphere, more like that of the Earth. "How you doing now?" asked the man of the lad, as the craft was again on an even keel. All right," replied Tom briskly. I didn't know what ailed me at first." "I was troubled the same way when I first went up in a balloon," commented Mr. Sharp. "We'll run along for a few miles at an elevation of about 500 feet, and then we'll go within 100 feet of the earth and see how the Red Cloud behaves under different conditions. Take a look below and see what you think of it." Tom looked low, through one of the several plate glass windows in the floor of the car. He gave a gasp of astonishment. "Why, we're right over Lake Carlopa," he gasped. "Of course," admitted Mr. Sharp with a laugh, "and I'm glad to say that we're better off than when I was last in the area over this same body of water." And he could scarcely repress a shudder at the thought of his perilous position in the blazing balloon, as related in detail in Tom Swift and His Motorboat. The lake was spread out below the navigators of the air like some mirror of silver in a setting of green fields. Tom could see a winding river that flowed into the lake, and he noted towns, villages, and even distant cities interspersed here and there with broad farms or patches of woodlands, like a bird's-eye view of a stretch of country. "This is great," he exclaimed with enthusiasm. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." "Oh, you haven't begun to see things yet," replied Mr. Sharp. "Wait until we take a long trip, which we'll do soon, as this ship is behaving much better than I dared to hope. Well, we're 500 feet high now, and I'll run along at that elevation for a while." Objects on the earth became more distinct now, and Tom could observe excited throngs running along and pointing upward. They were several miles from Shopton, and the machinery was running smoothly, the motor with its many cylinders purring like a big cat. "We could have lunch if we'd brought anything along to eat," observed Tom. "Yes," assented his companion, "but I think we'll go back now. Your father may be anxious. Just come here, Tom, and I'll show you how to steer. I'm going down a short distance." He depressed the rudder, and the Red Cloud shot earthward. Then, as the airship was turned about, the young inventor was allowed to try his hand at managing it. He said afterward that it was like guiding a fleecy cloud. "Point her straight for Shopton," counseled Mr. Sharp, when he had explained the various wheels and levers to the lad. "Straight she is," answered the lad, imitating a sailor's reply. "Oh, but this is great. It beats even my motorcycle." "It goes considerably faster at all events," remarked Mr. Sharp. "Keep her steady now while I take a look at the engine. I want to make sure it doesn't run hot." He went aft to where all the machinery in the car was located, and Tom was left alone in the small pilot house. He felt a thrill as he looked down at the earth beneath him and saw the crowds of wonder-gazers pointing at the great red airship flying high over their heads. Rapidly, the open field slipped along, giving place to a large city. "Roxmond," murmured Tom as he noted it. "We're about 50 miles from home. But we'll soon be back in the shed at this rate. We certainly are slipping along. 150 feet elevation," he went on as he looked at the gauge. "I wonder if I'll ever get used to going several miles up in the air." Now, I wonder... Oh, they must be talking about distance, not height, because he definitely wasn't several miles high, clearly. He shifted the rudder a bit to go to the left. The Red Cloud obeyed promptly, but the next instant something snapped. Tom, with a startled air, looked around. He could see nothing wrong, but a moment later, the airship dipped suddenly towards the earth. Then it seemed to increase its forward speed, and a few seconds later was rushing straight at a tall ornamental tower that rose from one of the corner of a large building. Mr. Sharp! Mr. Sharp! Cried the lad. Something's happened. We're heading for that tower. Steer to one side, called the balloonist. Tom tried, but found that the helm had become jammed. The horizontal rudder would not work, and the craft was rushing nearer and nearer every minute to the pile of brick and mortar. We're going to have a collision, shouted Tom. Better shut off the power. The two propellers were whirling around so swiftly that they looked like blurs of light. Mr. Sharp came rushing forward, and Tom relinquished the steering wheel to him. In vain did the aeronaut try to change the course of the airship. Then, with a shout to Tom to disconnect the electric switch, the man turned off the power from the motor. But it was too late. Straight at the tower rushed the Red Cloud, and a moment later had hit it a glancing blow, smashing the forward propeller and breaking off both blades. The nose of the aluminum gas container knocked off a few bricks from the tower, and then the ship, losing way, slowly settled to the flat roof of the building. "We're smashed!" cried Tom with something like despair in his voice. "That's nothing. Don't worry. It might be worse. Not the first time I've had an accident. It's only one propeller, and I can easily make another one," said Mr. Sharp in his quick, jerky sentences. He had allowed some of the gas to escape from the container, making the ship less buoyant, so that it remained on the roof. The aeronaut and Tom looked from the windows of the car to note if any further damage had been done. They were just congratulating themselves that the rudder marked the extent when, from a scuttle in the roof, there came a procession of young ladies led by an elderly matron wearing spectacles and having a very determined, bristling air. "Well, I must say this is a very unceremonious proceeding," exclaimed the spectacled woman. "Pray, gentlemen, to what are we indebted for this honor?" "It was an accident, ma'am," replied Mr. Sharp, removing his hat and bowing. "A mere accident." "Humph! I suppose it was an accident that the tower of this building was damaged, and if not absolutely loosened at the foundations, you will have to pay the damages." Then turning and seeing about 20 of young ladies behind her on the flat roof, each young lady eyeing with astonishment, not unmixed with admiration, the airship, the elderly one added, "Pupils, to your rooms at once! How dare you leave without permission?" "Oh, Miss Perkman!" exclaimed a voice at the sound of which Tom started. "Mayn't we see the airship? It will be useful in our natural philosophy study." Tom looked at the young lady who had spoken. "Mary Nestor!" he exclaimed. "Tom, I mean Mr. Swift," she rejoined. "How in the world did you get here?" "I was going to ask you the same question," retorted the lad. "We flew here." "Young ladies, silence!" cried Miss Perkman, who was evidently the principal of the school. "The idea of any one of you daring to speak to these persons without my permission and without an introduction, I shall make them pay heavily for damaging my seminary," she added, as she strode toward Mr. Sharp, who, by this time, was out of the car. "To your rooms at once!" Miss Perkman ordered again, but not a young lady moved. The airship was too much of an attraction for them. End of chapter 5. Okay. Man, I felt like I had to sneeze something fierce throughout that whole thing. So I'm going to see if I can get that to happen while we play this short commercial. And we are back. All right. Thank you guys for your patience. And let's continue with Chapter 6. Previously, in Chapter 5 of Tom Swift and His Airship, well, they were up in the air in the airship, in the Red Cloud as it's called, and they had some technical difficulties and landed on the roof of apparently a girls' school. Chapter 6. Getting off the roof. For a few minutes, Mr. Sharp was so engrossed with looking underneath the craft to ascertain in what condition the various planes and braces were, that he paid little attention to the old maid school principal after his first greeting. But Miss Perkman was not a person to be ignored. "I want pay for the damage to the tower of my school," she went on. "I could also demand damages for trespassing on my roof, but I will refrain in this case. Young ladies, will you go to your rooms?" she demanded. "Oh, please let us stay," pleaded Mary Nestor, beside whom Tom now stood. "Perhaps Professor Swift will lecture on clouds and air currents and such things as that," the girl went on shyly, smiling at the somewhat embarrassed lad. "If there's a professor present, perhaps it might be a good idea to absorb some knowledge," admitted the old maid, and unconsciously she smoothed her hair and settled her gold spectacles straight on her nose. "Professor, I will delay collecting damages on behalf of the Roxman Young Ladies' Seminary while you deliver a lecture on air currents," she went on, addressing herself to Mr. Sharp. "Oh, I'm not a professor," he said quickly. "I'm a professional balloonist, parachute jumper, giving exhibitions at country fairs and Leap for Life, all that sort of thing. I guess you mean my friend. He's smart enough for a professor. Invented a lot of things. How much is the damage?" "No professor?" cried Miss Perkman indignantly. "Why, I understood from Miss Nestor that she called someone professor." I was referring to my friend, Mr. Swift," said Mary. "His father's a professor anyhow, isn't he, Tom? I mean, Mr. Swift." I believe he's got a degree, but he never uses it," was the lad's answer. "Ha! Then I've been deceived. There's no professor present," and the old maid drew herself up as though desirous of punishing someone. "Young ladies, for the last time I order you to your rooms," and with a dramatic gesture she pointed to the scuttle through which the procession had come. "Say something, Tom. I mean, Mr. Swift," appealed Mary Nestor in a whisper to our hero. "Can't you give some sort of a lecture? The girls are just crazy to hear about the airship, and this ogress won't let us stay. Say something." I don't know what to say," stammered Tom, but he was saved for the necessity, for just then several women, evidently other teachers, came out on the roof. "Oh, an airship!" exclaimed one. "How lovely! We thought it was an earthquake, and we were afraid to come up for quite a while. But an airship? I've always wanted to see one, and now I have an opportunity. It will be just the thing for my physical geography and natural history class. Young ladies, attention, and I will explain certain things to you." "Miss Delafield, do you understand enough about an airship to lecture on one?" asked Miss Perkman smartly. "Enough so that my class may benefit," answered the other teacher, who was quite pretty. "Ahem. That is sufficient, and a different matter," conceded Miss Perkman. "Young ladies, give your undivided attention to Miss Delafield, and I trust you will profit by what she tells you. Meanwhile, I wish to have some conversation concerning damages with the persons who so unceremoniously visited us. It's a shame that the pupils of Roxman Seminary should be disturbed at their studies. Sir, I wish to talk with you." And the principal pointed a long, straight finger at Mr. Sharp. "Young ladies, attention," called Miss Delafield. "You will observe the large red body at the top. That is—" "I'd rather have you explain it," whispered Mary Nestor to Tom. "Come on, slip around to the other side. May I bring a few of my friends with me? I can't bear Miss Delafield. She thinks she knows everything. She won't see us if we slip around." "I shall be delighted," replied Tom, "only I fear I may have to help Mr. Sharp out of this trouble." "Don't worry about me, Tom," said the balloonist, who overheard him. "Let me do the explaining. I'm an old hand at it, been in trouble before. Many a time I've had to pay damages for coming down in a farmer's cornfield. I'll attend to the lady principal, and you can explain things to the young ones." And with a wink, the jolly aeronaut stepped over to where Miss Perkman, in spite of her prejudice against the airship, was observing it curiously. Glad to have the chance to talk to his young lady friend, Tom slipped to the opposite side of the car, with her and a few of her intimate friends, to whom she slyly beckoned. There Tom told how the Red Cloud came to be built, and of his first trip in the air, while on the opposite side Miss Delafield lectured to the entire school on aeronautics, as she thought she knew them. Mr. Sharp evidently did know how to explain matters to the irate principal, for in a short while she was smiling. By this time Tom had about finished his little lecture, and Miss Delafield was at the end of hers. The entire school of girls was grouped about the Red Cloud and curiously examining it, but Mary Nestor and her friends probably learned more than any of the others. Tom was informed that his friend had been attending the school in Roxmond since the fall term opened. "I little thought, when I found you, you were going to be smashed into that tower, that you were below there studying," said the lad to the girl. "I'm afraid I wasn't doing much studying," she confessed. "I had just a glimpse of the airship through the window, and I was wondering who was in it. When the crash came, Miss Perkman, who was nothing if not brave, at once started for the roof, and we girls all followed her. However, are you going to get that ship down?" "I'm afraid it's going to be quite the job," admitted Tom ruefully. "Something went wrong with the machinery, or this never would have happened. As soon as Mr. Sharp is settled with your principal, we'll see what we can do." "I guess he's settled now," observed Miss Nestor. "Here he comes." The aeronaut and Miss Perkman were approaching together, and the old maid did not seem half so angry as she had been. "You see," Mr. Sharp was saying, It'll be a good advertisement for your school. Think of having the distinction of having harbored the powerful airship Red Cloud on your roof." "I never thought of it in that light," admitted the principal. "Perhaps you're right. I shall put it in my next catalogue." "And as for damages to the tower, we will pay you $50, continued the balloonist. "Do you agree to that, Mr. Swift?" he asked Tom. "I think your father, the professor, would call that fair." "Oh, as long as this airship is partly the property of a professor, perhaps I should only take $35, put in Miss Perkman. "I'm a great admirer of professors. I mean in a strictly educational sense," she went on, as she detected a tendency on the part of some of the young ladies to giggle. "No, $50 would be about right," went on Mr. Sharp, pulling out a well-filled wallet. "I will pay you now. And if you'll wait, I will give you a receipt," continued the principal, evidently as much appeased at the mention of the professor's title as she was by the money. Excuse me. I had to take a drink there. Woo. All right. "We're getting off cheap," the balloonist whispered to Tom, as the head of the seminary started down the scuttle to the classrooms below. "Maybe it's easier getting out of that difficulty than it will be to get off the roof," replied the lad. "Don't worry. Leave that to me," the aeronaut said. It took considerable to ruffle Mr. Sharp. With a receipt in full for the damage to the tower, and expressing the hope that some day in the near future Professor Swift would do the seminary the honor of lecturing to the young lady pupils, Miss Perkman bade Mr. Sharp and Tom goodbye. "Young ladies, to your rooms," she commanded. "You've learned enough of airships, and there may be some danger getting this one off the roof." "Wouldn't you like to stay and take a ride in it?" Tom asked Miss Nestor. "Indeed I would," she answered daringly. "It's better than a motorboat. May I?" "Some day, when we get more expert in managing it," he replied, and he shook hands with her. "Now for some hard work," went on the young inventor to Mr. Sharp, when the roof was cleared of the last of the teachers and pupils. But the windows that gave view of the airship in its odd position on the roof were soon filled with eager faces, while in the streets below was a great crowd offering all manner of suggestions. "Oh, it's not going to be such a task," said Mr. Sharp. First, we'll repair the rudder and the machinery, and then we'll generate some more gas, rise, and fly home." "But the broken propeller?" objected Tom. "We can fly with one as well as we can with two, but just not so swiftly. Don't worry, we'll come out all right." And the balloonist assumed a confident air. It was not so difficult a problem as Tom had imagined to put the machinery in order, a simple break having impaired the working of the rudder. Then the smashed propeller was unshipped and the gas machine started. With all the pupils watching from the windows and a crowd observing from the streets and surrounding country, for word of the happening had spread, Tom and his friend prepared to ascend. They arose as well as they had done at the shed at home, and in a little while were floating over the school. Tom fancied he could observe a certain hand waving to him as he peered from the window of the car, a hand in one of the school casements, but where there were so many pretty girls doing the same thing, I hardly see how Tom could pick out any certain one, though he had extraordinarily good eyesight. However, the airship was now afloat, and starting the motor, Mr. Sharp found that even with one propeller, the Red Cloud did fairly well, making good speed. "Now home to repair everything, and we'll be ready for a longer trip," the aeronaut said to the young inventor as they turned around and headed off before the wind, while hundreds below them cheered. "We ought to carry spare propellers if we're going to be smashing into school towers. I seem to be short a hoodoo." "Nonsense. It wasn't your fault at all," commented Mr. Sharp warmly. "It would have happened to me had I been steering, but we'll take an extra propeller along after this." An hour later, they arrived in front of the big shed, and the Red Cloud was safely housed. Mr. Swift was just beginning to get anxious about his son and friend, and was glad to welcome them back. "Now for the big trip in about a week," exclaimed Mr. Sharp enthusiastically. "You'll come with us, won't you, Mr. Swift?" The inventor slowly shook his head. "Not on a trip," he said. "I may go for a trial spin with you, but I've got too important a matter underway to venture on a long trip." And he turned away without explaining what it was, but Tom and Mr. Sharp were soon to learn. End of Chapter 6. All right, so we're going to bookmark that right there. And we're going to come back over here. Oh, I didn't flip it to the other view. Okay, well, whatever. It is what it is. So, there we are. We are back into the swing of things. We should be back on a regular schedule, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. And thank you guys for hanging out. I really do appreciate it. And for those who have been supporting all along, I really do appreciate it. Jiza, Zane Kyber, or Jiza, I don't know, however you pronounce your name. Commander Root, Skippy, Nicole, thank you. I have a feeling we've got a couple of bots in the room. And yeah, we'll go from there. I think that's it for now. I'm going to stop the recording. And thanks, folks. Nice robot there. Thanks, Skippy. I appreciate it. And for those of you joining us for the Bromigos in a little while, we will see you over on GSU Media for the Bromigos of the Streampocalypse. Who knows what we're doing tonight? I don't. See you later.